Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Chris, for inviting me. And I think you've kind of touched on the main point of what I'm going to try to do here today, which is to talk a little bit about my work with the Heurich, this small society, which I'm going to talk a lot about in a little bit. Just to say that I'm a research fellow. I'm doing a postdoc here at UCL. I've been here for a couple of years, and but I've been working with indigenous communities in Brazil for about 12 years. I've done mainly research in anthropology, but I've also worked with NGOs. I've worked for the Brazilian Prosecution's Office doing advocacy for indigenous communities, which is actually perhaps one of my favorite jobs that I've done. And I started working with them as a driver. So I drove a small car for an NGO going around communities. And these were Imbuá Guarani communities in the south of Brazil, which is where I started working. And then I moved to work with the Heurich. And I started working with them in 2011. My work and what I'm going to present here today is about songs, but it's about cosmology. It's about how these songs make social relations more clear, how social relations in that setting include not only relations between humans, but they usually include relations with other than human beings, or something that people might call non-humans, but beings such as divinities and spirits and deceased kin, enemy spirits, and all those things. And I've done this recently through Anthropology of Music, something that Jerome's been doing for a long time, and I'm happy just to do a little bit of teaching with him this term here at UCL with him. And the thing that I'd like to think about is how do we do an anthropology of music, and how do we think about songs, chants, sung speeches, and even myths and narratives from the point of view of anthropology, right? And the way I look into it is by looking into the relationship between cosmological beliefs, kinship practices, and songs. What does it mean to be a person? How do songs show the dangers to some people, the danger to keep kinship relations, and I believe that's going to be a bit clearer in a little bit. And I do that by looking at some linguistic aspects of the songs. I hope I'll not bore you too much with that, but also looking at sonic and melodic aspects of songs. And also I like looking at how to translate them, right? Because all these songs are sung in the Heurich, which is a language that only they speak, and it's quite interesting to look and to think about how to translate songs as well. They can reveal a lot of things. I brought 3 questions which are quite different, and I'll come back to them at the end. And they are: why do Amerindian groups sing? This is a direct reference to a famous guy called Anthony Seeger, famous ethnomusicologist who worked with the Suya in Brazil, and that's the title of his book. Why do the Suya sing? And it's something to keep going, right? Just as a question, as a thing to think about. The second question is a bit more specific, and it's like, what is a voice? And finally, the third one is, how does music affect and is affected by relations between people? So I'm going to try to come back to that at the end, if I have time. So the Heurich, they have a very strong belief system in which the gods, called Mai, have a very important role. They live in 8 small villages, around 50 and 70 people each, and they're about 520 in total. Yeah, they speak their own language, also called Heurich, which is part of the Tupi-Guarani linguistic family, which is one of the major linguistic branches in South America. And language learning is very strong, but most of them also speak Portuguese as a second language and speak it and write it very well. They're not hunter-gatherers, but they hunt and fish and they plant, and they're horticulturalists. And the main thing for them is maize, corn, and not manioc, which is perhaps a common association with indigenous groups in Brazil. But their thing is with corn, with maize. And they make this delicacy, I think, which is a tortoise stew with maize flour served on a tortoise shell. It's unbelievably good. I've just brought some photos of them just to have an idea. They're a really growing population. They grew from around 120 only in 1981 to, as I said, around 520 today. They enjoy decorating their bodies on a daily basis, not only on ritual or festivals or ceremonies or anything like that. They produce these beautiful earrings from birds' feathers and seeds, and both men and women wear them. They really like painting their faces with red annatto dye. As you can see here, the annatto is a plant that grows all over, and you just open the seeds and remove the seeds, and you can just paint your face. And they do that, as I said, for ceremonies, but they do it on a daily basis, just something that they like to do. They're also master weavers, and they dye cotton with these seeds, which produce a very intense red coloring. But they also buy cotton threads of different colors in the city, which I'll come back to that in a little bit. So just to give an idea of who they are, they contact with the non-indigenous society happened in 1976, but as it often happens in indigenous Amazonian communities in Brazil and elsewhere, that wasn't a sort of first contact. They knew the whites, they knew non-indigenous groups for a long time, and they were actually trying to avoid contact for a long time. Yeah. But they directly sought that contact after several years of fighting with other indigenous groups, uncontacted at the time. This is where they live. So this is Brazil, South America, Brazil. That green area there, it's what we call the legal Amazon, and it encompasses all 7 states of the north region of Brazil, so 59% of Brazilian territory. And the bit in orange there is the Araueté official territory. And also, again over here, this is the Xingu River, which some of you might have heard of, flowing from south to north, where it reaches the Amazon River, around here. And this is the city of Altamira, which is the main reference to them. It's about 100 miles from their villages. And even though this is the legal Amazon, you can see even from this picture how frontier expansion and what we call the logging or deforestation arch has been well underway for several years. And if you look at the sort of different map, it's hard to see, I know, but this is their territory right here, the Xingu River. A lot of other indigenous territories surrounding, but you can see how roads, cities, and deforestation is sort of surrounding their territory. This expansion of the economic frontier is still underway with logging, soybean plantations, and mining and cattle. And due to the recent catastrophic events in the Brazilian elections, is probably going to have a lot of support for that sort of expansion. And these activities, of course, they boom Amazonian cities, thus increasing the demand for everything. Including electricity, right? So the most recent form of effect and destruction comes from so-called clean energy infrastructural projects, such as the Belo Monte hydroelectric dam, which is the 3rd largest dam in the world, and it's near the city of Altamira, which, as I said, it's the main reference to them, even though it's about 2 days journey from them. This is again just quickly the site of the dam, and this is the dam under construction. So the presentation and what I'm going to talk about, it was called 2 Songs for a Red Girl, and I'll come to these 2 songs in a little bit. But first I just want to give a sort of overview of the main musical genres amongst the Araueté. And Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, who you might have heard, did his field work with the same Araueté in the beginning of the 80s. Yeah? And his main definition was between music of the enemies and music of the gods. So these would be the 2 main musical genres, right? But through my work and through my research, I found a couple of songs that don't fit neatly in these 2 genres, and these are the 2 songs that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. But the music of the gods, before we get to the 2 songs again, the music of the gods, the main characteristic of the music of the gods is to bring deceased kin and divinities to sing among the living, right?
Sorry, to bring the what? The
deceased kin and divinities. So the main idea is that through shamanistic practice you learn how to go to the god's domain, which I call the Mai, and are really important to them, and you bring back deceased kin to sing among the living. Yeah. And in these songs they talk about how life is in the god's domain, but they also mention and talk about stuff that is going on in the village. So they sort of make this connection between what happens in the afterlife. They kind of give you a glimpse of how to imagine the world or what happens after death, but they also give their little comments, in a way, about what's going on between the living. And I just want to say that although we'll see how the Araueté shamans are also healers, which is perhaps the most common association or common definition of shamanism, right? To be a healer. From the Araueté's point of view, a shaman is first and foremost a singer. So healing is something rare, it's something that doesn't happen that often through song, and it's not the main thing of shamanistic activity amongst the Araueté. Right? So for them, a shaman is someone who sings, and ideally every man would be a shaman, would become a shaman eventually, yeah, in his adult life. Only men are shamans amongst the Araueté, but I'll come back to sort of gender relations and how women play into shamanistic singing as well in a little bit. So basically these songs they narrate the voices of others, right? So a shaman brings deceased kin to sing, but it's not as if these deceased spirits or deceased kin are standing next to him, right? They're singing through him, right? So the whole idea is for him to open his body to allow deceased kin to sing through his voice. Yeah. And I'll come back to that again, just to think about what is a voice and what does it mean to have a voice in this context of singing, not a political voice necessarily, but a voice. Yeah. And what does it mean to have a voice when the words that are coming out of your mouth ultimately do not belong to you? Yeah? They're someone else's words. And a shaman's main instrument to do this is his rattle, which is again a bit different from most Amazonian rattles, which are, you know, a gourd filled with stones, which you might have seen. This is a more elaborate rattle. It's woven, it's quite big, and you put snail shells in there to make the sound, which you'll hear in a moment. You wrap it around with cotton, and you put red macaw tail feathers over there. I just realized that should have been in color, but you'll see it in a little bit. And as I said, only men sing, but to see this as a sort of soloistic singing, so this is a classic singing position for Arauete shamans, right? So after arriving in the central plaza, sitting down and singing like that, or sitting down like that. But to see that as a sort of soloistic performance is misleading in two ways. First, as I said, because it's not always him. It's him with the deceased. Yeah. So there's always someone else. There's always someone else through him. So it's not solo. It's at least a duo. And also, a shaman's wife is fundamental in these songs. Right. This is Jakamituru, my friend, as I said. And this is Jakamituhi, his wife. She's the one that brings him to the plaza. She's the one that stays there and brings him back. But not only that, throughout his whole performance of songs, she will repeat the words that he's singing, but without the melody. Yeah? And the function of that, or the idea, is that it helps the deceased to go back to the gods once the song is finished. So after he comes out of his house, a shaman comes out of his house singing, goes to the central plaza, sings sometimes for up to 3 or 4 hours, goes back, and that's one continuous song, yeah? Goes back. At the end, he lies in his hammock, put his rattle down, and he repeats a couple of verses a cappella without no rattle. And that's a very beautiful and precious moment, because especially listening to recordings, because after you'll see and you hear the loud noise of the rattle and you're listening to that for hours, and then it suddenly stops and you think it's done, but then he sings a couple of verses still without the rattle, and she repeats that again. And that is to make sure that the deceased that is singing through him understand that he's not allowed to stay. Yeah? That he needs to go back to where he lives, he or she lives now with the gods. And that is very important, because the Arauete usually say that the problem with the dead, that is the sort of phrasing. So the problem with the dead is that they have a really hard time forgetting us. Yeah? So they're like, we don't, it's fine. Once someone dies, and that's very common in Amazonia, people sometimes burn the whole house, get rid of every single belonging, but mainly stop saying their names, yeah? Or change their names. You have to add a suffix. So that, in a sense, there's an idea that when people die, they become sort of enemies. They become different, and they belong to a different group. Yeah? So the fact that they come back, it's obviously interesting in a way, because they manage to hear some of what happens in the afterlife, but it's also dangerous, yeah, because it risks erasing this boundary between the living and the dead, right? Which is something that you don't want to do, right? And that's why those repetition, non-melodic repetition of words is not just a simple echo or a simple repetition of the shaman's male performance. That is actually where everything sort of comes together, if that makes sense. So frequently these songs involve bringing gods and deceased to eat, yeah? And I brought just a little video of perhaps the most famous shaman called Canipayero. He's been singing for I don't know, 50 years, and he's Jakamituru's father. So the guy that was singing just now, it's his father, right? And I've brought a little video just to have an idea of what happens when singing turns into ceremony, right? So when the deceased and the gods are brought down to share food with the living. We'll hear more of that in a little bit, but it's just to start to have because it doesn't make much sense to talk about songs if you can't really, right, picture the sound, so to speak. So the other main genre is called music of the enemies, right? So you remember the first one was called music of the gods, and that is the relationship that is being, making alive. Here, this one's called music of the enemies, and it has to do with warfare, and it has to do with homicide and killing, right? One would think that those are not so common anymore after pacification, after indigenous groups are sort of forced to stop doing warfare against each other, and the whole concept of warfare and homicide is something we can think about, because when I'm talking about here about enemies and warfare, it's not large scale destruction of societies, but it's something, it does involve war, but in a more smaller scale, if that makes sense. But the main point is that these are songs that you learn after you kill someone, yeah? After you kill an enemy, yeah? These are not songs that you learn when you kill your own kin, yeah? So when you kill people from a different group. And when you kill someone, you also die. And you become a corpse for 3 to 5 days. And your belly fills with blood. And the victim's spirit comes, or victim's double, as we sometimes call it, comes to teach you songs. Yeah? And it teaches you a set of songs. And those songs you have to perform publicly. Now, the enemy in this case is what you would call a teacher of songs, yeah? And these songs, different from the first one, which is more focused on one visible person in the shaman himself, these songs are presented as a collective dance song, and it's sung during a maize beer festival, right? So you invite a family to make beer, yeah? This is maize beer. It's alcoholic maize beer. And you invite people from different villages to come and form a compact group of people and sing these songs and drink while it lasts. So the last time I was there with them for that in 2013, the whole party or drinking ceremony lasted 30 hours, yeah? And you sing for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then you rest for maybe 15 or 20, and then you sing some more. And you have to sing the whole set of songs that the victim taught you. And when those are finished, and if there's still beer left, you have to sing other songs that someone might know, right? The point is to finish, you have to finish all the beer. And in sort of my rough calculations for that party was around 400, 450 liters.
Oktoberfest.
Sort of, yes. Yeah. It was in September actually, but that's all right. So I just wanted to kind of point out that they're very different from the shamanistic songs, right? So if you had a sort of duo between shaman and deceased, or trio with the wife, when that was the focus, where you had long 3-hour songs and different voices speaking in those songs. Here it's a collective. It's hard to tell, and it's hard to say, but to see, I mean, from here. But this is after maybe 20 hours of party, so you can see how everyone's a bit, you know. But you can see I'm back there, and this is one of the few photos that I have that a friend took, because I was in there with an arrow on my hand and a bow in the other one, and with the recorder hanging from my neck, yeah, which was the only way I could record the songs. And you can see how here, instead of that trio, you have a sort of more collective experience, right? And that is also, again, tied to the way they see these things. So if shamanistic singing is called singing, this is called dancing, right? Even though it involves singing, this is described and thought of as a dance, yeah? And it's these songs, as I said, they're short, they're 20, 30-minute songs, and they're basically the repetition of one or two verses. And these verses are repeated over and over in sort of a loop, in a way that they enter into each other, right? You can't really tell the difference between one verse and the other one. They sort of go into a loop, and the idea is to produce a unison singing. Yeah, you have, of course, the person who's leading, who's the one that knows and owns the songs, and everyone sort of follows through him. And one of the most fascinating things about songs, and the fascinating things about trying, in this case, to translate them, is that these songs are, even though you'd think that they are simpler, because you only have one of two verses, and they're all repeated, they are sung and danced, and they're sung in a way in which the words are cut in half. One syllable is connected to the word, to the previous word, while the other syllable is connected to the word after it. And these reformed, sort of broken words, they make up, when they are sung together, words that make no sense in Arawater. They're not words in the language at all. Yeah? And so the whole effort of trying to translate them and to understand them, really, is you have to unbreak them and sort of put them together, try to extract that meaning from what, to kind of understand what these songs mean, until obviously you realize that the whole meaning of it is breaking the songs in the first place, right? And you've just spent 6 months doing that for maybe, I don't know why, yeah? And my sort of personal take or approach to this is that these songs are broken because a lot of things in this ceremony kind of point to this brokenness from the start, yeah? So if you think about killing or warfare or homicide, it starts, these songs originate in the breaking of someone's body, in a way, yeah, and separating that body from the body and a double, and that turns into teaching the songs to a killer who's also broken in his identity between who he is and the enemies and the victim's double who's attached to him for life. And then it comes back to the way that the songs are danced and sung, and the way that they're performed as broken words, right? So you can see that's sort of my interpretation of what it is we're looking at here. Okay, so these are the two main genres, two main musical genres.
Do you have an example of that?
Oh, right. Yes, thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah. As you can see, that like it's not just the one shaman's only voice. It's a sort of it's a lot of people trying to make their voices come together. So you have these two genres, but then I was struck with this event. It was a very unfortunate event. So the person I'm calling here Red Girl, and I will remove the A further on. It's Red Girl is a direct translation of an Arawater name. Yeah, so it's a common name, and it's not the name of this person, but it's the name I've come up with to talk about this situation. Red Girl was my neighbor. She was about 17, and one night she went to pick up some medicine for her granny, and she was shot by a spirit. She was shot by these guys called Anin. The Anin, they are not gods, they are not enemies, and they are something else. They are forest dwelling spirits. They come very close to the villages and they shoot their arrows on people. The days after, a few days, she became very, very ill. Sort of like purple patches started to emerge on her body, and she became weaker and weaker. Yeah? And this sad event generated these two songs about Red Girl. One of them is directly related to the spirits and how to deal with them, and the other one is more directed to her and how to deal with her illness. So the first one, which I'm just calling here Song 1, is a spirit capturing song. It's a song which is partly defined as a speech and partly defined as a song by the Araueta themselves, right? So these are songs, they have two clear blocks. We're going to hear both of them, and one of them is described as a speech and the other one is described as a song. Song 2 is a really rare, as I said, and it's a healing song. And this one is about manipulating. It involves a sort of manipulation of the body, but it's really is about bringing her soul back to her body. Yeah? So, Song 1, which is called Anin Pihi, as I said, it's about spirit capturing or catching, or grabbing. And it happens in a very different situation than the two ones that I was talking about before. So remember, you had the daylight sort of shamanistic singing by himself, sort of, and then you have the collective drunken ceremony. And these songs are sung in a situation that is very unlike those two. They're sung in the middle of the night, 2-3 a.m. by the shaman himself and one helper who goes with him, and your occasional ethnographer. Yeah? And they go out to hunt these spirits and to kill them. Yeah? To capture them and to kill them. But before capturing them, the shaman voices these spirits, and we can hear what they have to say. And that's what I think is most remarkable about these songs, is that in order to destroy a certain being, a certain entity, you have to sort of let it speak, right? Again, it involves letting something other go through your body. Yeah, it involves opening your body for those voices. And after the shaman kills the spirit, he crouches down, same as the first photo I showed you, and then the gods sing. Yeah. So they're composed of these two blocks. First, capturing and voicing the spirits, and then the gods singing. And these two blocks are indexed by lots of different things, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. So the first one, as I said, is defined as a speech and not a song, and it involves laughter, and involves listening to the spirits laugh. While the second one, the one in which the gods sing, what is important here are the refrains, right? The repetitions that end each verse. And I think these differences are important, because you'll see how these differences accumulate. So you have this difference between speech and song, laughter and refrain, and I'll come back to that. So these are the spirits. there was something wrong with that. The file was a bit weird, but you could see, I hope, how it's really a speech, not a melodic sort of song, and how he was laughing throughout that, right? So that's the spirit speaking through the shaman, yeah? And this is a little bit of what they say, right? So the spirit's saying, a lot of them are over there, others are by the forest. Big one's here, says my grandfather, looking for food. We pierce the painted face, a peccary's carcass that is there. A peccary's carcass that is there. Yeah? Sorry. So if you think about what this is about, right? So it's about pigs, right? So peccaries are wild pigs, wild Amazonian pigs. Yeah? But the thing is, why are they talking about pigs, and who are these pigs, right? And remember that these are the anin, the spirits speaking through the shaman, right? So this is their voice, it's what they're saying. They are, of course, quoting other spirits by calling them grandfather, right? Sort of showing a sort of existence of kinship relations among the spirits, if that makes sense. And they are calling the Arauete pigs. Yeah? So they're basically looking at the Arauete and calling them pigs. In fact, the Arauete say that the spirits, the anin, they not only call them by pigs, but they see them as pigs. Yeah? Or see us as pigs. Yeah? They see us as having the physical form of pigs. Yeah? And if you recall that the photos I showed you of how the Arauete like to paint their bodies and decorate themselves in a very daily basis, you can understand why they're talking about piercing the painted face. Yeah? So the painted face is Redgar, right? It's the pig that they just hunted. Yeah? And you start to see how there's differences in the way these different cosmological beings see each other. Yeah? So if the Arauete see these guys as spirits and define them and call them as spirits, and only shamans can sort of make them come alive through their voices, from the point of view of the spirits, the Arauete are pigs. Yeah? So this is the first block. This is when the spirits are caught. And so if you just try to remember, this is what it sounds like. Yeah? Is it too loud? And after they're killed, then come the gods. Yeah, and you can see a bit of the difference, right? And this is, can you imagine this? This is in the outskirts of an Arauete village. It's a small village, about 70 people in the Amazon. And there's no one there except the shaman, his helper who kills the spirits, and me recording the songs. And it's the same guy who voices that creaky laughter speech, and right after sings these songs. Yeah? So it's this ability to produce through tobacco and training a body that is able to receive such different voices. Yeah? And I take this as serious as I can. Yeah? If that makes sense, right? So remember, the spirits were talking about pigs. And here it comes a completely different thing. Yeah, the dogs are talking about these birds called COTINGAs. With COTINGAs I come to the mice house. The mice are the gods. In there, COTINGAs saw all of them together. Are they talking to me? Yeah. These are the COTINGA birds. Yeah, very, very tiny birds. Very tiny birds. that people use to make feathers, yeah? To make earrings with their feathers. So these are the COTINGA feathers, yeah? And if you remember one of the first photos I showed you of the lady with the earrings, right? So these are the earrings that, well, not these, but similar, that she was wearing. These are seeds. These are my core feathers, and my core chest feathers, and these are COTINGA birds, right? Feathers. So the gods are, if the spirits were talking about humans as pigs, the gods are comparing the spirits, or calling the spirits, these birds. Yeah, birds that they can capture, birds that you could kill, and birds that you could transform in earrings, in something else. Yeah. So you can see how both from the god and the spirit's perspective, it's all about hunting, but they're hunting different things. Yeah. And there are other differences which I'm not going to go into right now, but I've sort of brought these differences in the same event, how complex this can get, right? So if you have spirits who see things as pigs and talk about these, you also have different ways of using language. So the spirits use direct speech with quotation marks and all that, while the gods only use indirect speech. So you have the laughs, the refrains, the pigs, the birds. You have sort of layers who sort of accumulate, yeah, in order to try to, I don't know, that's how, at least how I try to sort of get closer to understand what these songs mean. So this was the first song. This was about revenge in a way, right? It was about going out there and killing the spirits that injured Red Girl, killed the spirits that shot her, right? But song 2 is a different business, yeah? So song 2 is a healing song. It's sung again by a shaman, again with the help of the gods. These are very rare songs, and it was only sung because she became so ill that it was her double, her soul, drifted away and went to live with the gods, which is something that the deceased do, so it's not very good for the living to do, yeah? Unless, of course, you do it in a controlled manner, which is what shamanism is all about, right? So shamanism is all about being able to control your own body, to open up and go to the god's domain and come back safely. Those sounds that you hear at the end is the shaman trying to remove the arrows from her arm by sucking them out. Yeah? And then again you see how these songs are a little bit different from the other ones again, right? So they involve singing again, but they involve more than that. They involve a more active relationship between these bodies. And the question is sort of, how do you, in this case, how do you bring someone's soul back from the god's domain? Yeah? And it involves basically 3 things. It involves, first, poetic deception, is what you call it. Yeah? You see how the whole thing involves deceiving and lying to the gods. Yeah? Which is okay in a way, because that's what they do when we die. Yeah? So say the Heurich. When we die, we go to the god's domain. First, they eat us because they're cannibal gods, and I can talk about that, but it's a different talk. But then they make us again, and then they lie to us. Yeah. Then they say, "Look, this is your sister here, right? Look, this is your brother," to try to make you, stay and understand that that's where your kin is. So the first thing involves lying, right? And just again here, keeping in mind that this is a complex situation, is perhaps even more complex situation than the other ones in terms of voices, because the shaman is voicing Red Girl, who's ill, right? So it's her double who's singing through his voice. So she's there, her body's there, her other body, as you could call it, or her double, her soul, is with the shaman singing through him. The things, yeah, well, just bear with me, yeah? So the things he sings are sung from her point of view, but sometimes she quotes him, right? So he's singing, her quoting him, yeah? Such as here, right? His name, she's calling him Tanajiru, and she says, he sings, "Your father is truly in God's village," said Tanajiru, right? So, but who said the whole thing was her, and who's voicing her is him, yeah? But this is a lie, yeah? So, he's telling her, look, your father is here, he's in God's village, implying that he's deceased, and he's just, you know, in a different neighborhood, right? In a different village of the gods, which is not true, because her father is alive and well in the village. But he's trying to get her to move with him out of that specific situation, right? Start to point to her, like, look, we have to go somewhere else, yeah? But he can't tell that directly, because then the gods would know, and they can't know. Otherwise they wouldn't allow her to come back. Yeah? 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 Make sense? Alright, cool. The second technique to bring someone's soul back from the God's domain is changing the context again. But this is done in song form by changing refrains. Yeah? So this is a complicated thing. I'm not going to go into how refrain index voices, because it's, I don't really understand it that well. But when you change the refrain of the song, the part that you repeat after each verse, yeah, you change who's speaking through you, yeah, and you change the context of what is being spoken, right? So the first part of the song is all about the dialogue between him and her. It's all about this dialogue. She's asking, "Where's my father?" He's saying, "Your father is in a different village," you know, and it's all about that. The second part, the refrain is completely different. It totally changes, and it's not about the dialogue anymore. It's about the fragrance of banana trees in a different village. Yeah. So they've moved. They're in a different village, but they're not talking to each other again, and they are talking about the fragrance of banana trees. Right? And here it might seem not poetic enough, perhaps, but this is fundamental, right? Because being a complete human person has a lot to do with fragrance, right? It has a lot to do with perfume, right? So painting and decorating your body with red annatto dye is not just a visual aesthetic experience. It's about the smell of red annatto dye, right? So by changing that, again, he's pointing to a different scent, yeah? He's pointing to a context in which things smell different, yeah? And then we come back, we go to the last part of how does one retrieve a soul from the God's domain, which is again about lying. And this is when the song changes again. It comes back to the dialogue between them, and then he tells her, look, I've run out of tobacco, yeah, and we need to go get more tobacco. Yeah. And this is very important because the gods love tobacco, yeah, but they don't have it, and they can't access it. Yeah. There's no tobacco in the gods' domain. First of all, because the gods can't plant anything. Yeah? They are, in a sense, raw beings. Yeah, if you think about the raw and the cooked and all that. Yeah, they are raw. They don't know their ways around plants. Yeah, so the way they get tobacco is when the shamans can come visit and bring tobacco to them. Yeah. So the shaman's basically saying, look, I've run out. You need to go to the offie. Yeah. You guys just hang on a minute. I'm just going to go. I'm going to take this little girl with me. Yeah. But I'll be back. Yeah. Yeah. Well.
Maybe why it's a rare song.
And that's the end of the song. Yeah. And that's where it ends, with this deception about tobacco. Because of course the shaman comes back for the tobacco, never goes back, or goes back in a few days. But then probably the gods will have forgotten about it, or hopefully.
But it might just be pissed off for the next time.
Yeah? So just to kind of, I think my...
No, you've got 10 minutes.
Yeah? Alright, okay. But that's good. To sort of come back to those questions from the beginning, yeah? Because I think now we can sort of address them a bit more. And if we recall the things that I talked about, the music of the gods, the music of the enemies, the spirit capturing songs, the healing songs, how they are all different, but how they all seem to point to some things, right? So why do they sing? I'd say that a lot of it is about experience, this diverse range of relations, which I'd like to call social relations, and I'll explain that in a little bit, with spirits, divinities, enemies, and deceased kin. Yeah. So other than human beings. Yeah. So singing is about experiencing these relationships, because it is through singing that that these guys become audible. Yeah, it's how they become, how you can listen to what they have to say. Yeah, it is through that you can listen how spirits see us as pigs to be hunted down. It's through that you can understand that the gods have no access to tobacco. Yeah, it is through these songs that you can understand how the broken body of an enemy translates into sort of broken words in a song. Right? But sometimes it's also about singing to protecting specific relatives from losing their will to live, yeah? From forever becoming this other, as in the case of Red Girl, yeah? So it's about making sure that she stays, yeah? Because these are, so song sort of allows for this cosmological opening, but these are of course dangerous relations as well. Yeah. So if the first song was about listening, capturing and killing these uneasy spirits, right? The second one was about caring for Redgar, protecting through the voice, protecting her through the voice, right? So sort of my point being that singing fluctuates, right, between making these people audible sometimes, while other times protecting the Araweté from this excessive orality. Yeah? And which brings us to sort of another thing, which is the idea of social relations and music, and the question of who are people in Amazonia. Yeah? Because if you think about it, what these songs show is that the idea of who's human, who's people, expands when all these others are accounted for. Yeah, because the gods have their own lives. They do stuff that we all do. They lie. They don't have access to stuff. They've got some other stuff. They try to protect their kin. They have their own villages. So do the spirits. The spirits hunt, and they have their own villages as well. They try to capture kin from other groups. So what it means to be people and what it means to be human sort of changes, right? And this is not just a sort of weird claim, right? This is something that you can see in the case of these songs, when you look at specific words, so the word for human, the word for people, you'll find it in the mouth of the Dianin spirits, for example. You find it in their mouth, in the way they talk, by saying, the gods are not people, we are. Yeah? So what people can be is something that is cosmologically discussed, or it's cosmologically disputed. Yeah? So, and this is something that has been developed by a lot of people. One of them being Eduardo Village Castro as well, as sort of Amerindian perspectivism. This is an idea if you want to read and think about that. But the main idea is this, right? Is that the social is larger, broader than humans, right? That animals, enemies can be thought of as human as well. And that in Amazonia, social relations in a way include all of these people. Yeah? And if you're going to think about society, you have to expand it maybe a little bit more. The other point is this idea of what is a voice, which I think the Arauete case and just working with these songs is just marvelous, because it just shows you how a singer's own voice is never in focus, right? It's not about him, it's not about the shaman himself, it's about everything that he brings there, right? Everything that he kind of allows to come out of his voice. And this is very important, because it shows that there's something alien or foreign that is intrinsic to singing, right? So singing is about bringing other points of view into focus and not your own, which, if you think about, is very different from the way music is thought of in several places, where the focus is on the composer or the singer, and that the praise goes to him, and that's what's important, right? Even if it's a collective sort of ensemble. Here, it's not about him at all, which obviously makes life very hard for people like me, because ideally, for shamanic Arauete singers, ideally you are not even there when you sing. Yeah? So that's what they say. They say, for example, when you go and talk to them, they say, well, could we, talk about your song, the song that you sung yesterday? They say, no, I can't, I wasn't there. Yeah? And that's not just a trick, or not just a thing like that, not because I'm very annoying or something, that don't want to talk to me. It's happened to more people, and it's something that other people say as well. Which basically meant that for me to try to understand some of these songs, I had to triangulate, right? So when you were singing, I couldn't talk to you, but I could talk to you about his songs, right? And then when you were singing, I'd have to talk to you. And that was it's an interesting way of doing research, but it becomes more difficult. But and that was what gave me the key for many things, right? Because if the shamans are usually not willing to talk about their songs, their wives are always willing to talk about their songs, yeah? And they love it. And one of the great things of doing research with the Arauete is that there's such a sort of power balance that the Arauete women never felt intimidated of talking to me, right? That I was very lucky for that, and it's not that common at all. But I was able to talk to women a lot about a lot of things, right? And that is, and they know so much about these things, right? Because they're there every single time, they repeat the songs, and that was through that you end up looking at these very particular but very important things, such as repeating the words to make the deceased go back to where they belong. Right. Which brings us about maybe to the last thing that I want to talk about. Is that for a long time, that, as I was saying at the beginning, deceased kin, or the dead, was seen in Amazonia, in literature, in anthropological literature in Amazonia, as enemies, yeah? As something that immediately after death, the deceased become enemies. And that is very clear in a lot of groups, right? Groups where you have to get rid of all their belongings, you can't ever say their names anymore. Groups in which there's a sort of mortuary feast for the deceased that sort of ends the relationship with them, and they just become these nameless beings that you don't relate to. But all that idea started to change a little bit, and it's becoming a little bit more complex, right? Because that also happens with the Araueté. In the end, the deceased, they become gods, and the gods are cannibals, so in a way they are sort of prototypical enemies, yeah? But that takes a while. And that is directly related to the memory of the shamans, right? So what happens with the Araueté is that you can only bring a deceased back to sing if you knew that person when that person was alive, yeah? So if I become a shaman and I start singing, I'm not able to just go to the God's domain and bring back to sing someone that I didn't know, yeah? Someone that I never saw when they were alive, someone that died 50 years ago, yeah? So that basically means that when all the shamans that knew you before you died have died, there will be no one else, even though there will be shamans, there will be no one else to bring you back to sing, yeah? And then you're forgotten, yeah? And that's when you sort of dissipate. That's when you sort of become this general category of gods, yeah? And this is a very central thing. It's this active sort of forgetting, right? So singing has this important aspect of course, bringing them back, bringing the deceased and others, and voice them, but also dissipating all of these relations. Thank you very much, and I hope you had a good time.